Hey, what's up? Welcome back to Coffee and Current Events, and today I have a very interesting mapping update for you. Today we are going to be talking about some very interesting things that have happened all across the front line. Let's jump into this. First off, we're going to start off as usual on the Zaporozhye front. Down here there has been fighting as usual, and the fighting is very different in intensity in just different locations. For example, if we go near Pitahaki, this settlement right here, the fighting in Pitahaki is by far a lot lighter than the fighting in Robotine, and that is literally just about 29 kilometers apart. So that's a dramatic difference, and it's literally 29 or 30 kilometers apart. With that being said, still fighting on the front, and the intensity of it varies greatly, so you have to be very careful and resist the urge to generalize the situation on the front based on one particular scenario. So for example, if we go down near Pitahaki, there is fighting between Pitahaki and Zherbianki, but it's pretty light, and the Russian forces seem to be holding their positions. We can go back over the past few days, and you see some minor changes, but it's not anything serious, and what the Ukrainians have captured is probably about, it looks like about 2 fields right there. So it's pretty stable. The situation here in Zherbianki is pretty stable. The Russians have been holding their own, and the Ukrainians have actually been holding their own too, and they've actually managed to hold Pitahaki. So it's pretty much a stable situation here in Zherbianki for the Russians, and not too much has changed since the last update. Now, if we move on to Robotine, it's a lot different. Recently, the Ukrainians have been launching wave-style attacks against Robotine due to the strategic importance this town has. You see, basically after Robotine, you can reach very close, if not to the first line of Russian defense. So there are about 3 to 5 lines of Russian defenses in the Zaporozhye area. However, they basically all come after Robotine, so this town is very important. Hypothetically speaking, if the Ukrainians were to move from Robotine down here and take the town of Klishchiivka right here, they would essentially be at the first line of Russian defense. Not to say the fighting hasn't been real in the past, but the first lines of defense are the actual barriers that Russia has constructed to stop this Ukrainian counteroffensive. All the fighting that's been going on up until today has literally just been in the security zone. The Ukrainians have not actually approached the first main line of Russian defense. So if the Ukrainians were to capture these 2 towns, it would be the all-out fight beginning right there that would decide the future of the Russian offensive in Ukraine. And here the situation actually is getting pretty bad for the Russians. Recently, the Russians have been holding their own Robotine and keeping the Ukrainians back, but the situation is getting pretty bad for me. I mean, if you look at this, we go back over the past few days, this is just the 23rd of July, okay? This is the area of their control, the red's obviously the Russian territory, on the 23rd of July. If we just go to the 24th, it's right there. So if we look where the Russians controlled on July 23rd, okay? And then we move on to the 24th, and then after that we move on to the 24th, we'll see that the Ukrainians have actually advanced about, well, it's about to be almost 1,000 meters, okay? And while it doesn't sound like a lot, it is very important because if the Ukrainians are able to push their advance here, they're going to end up flanking Robotine. If they're able to flank the city, they're going to really complicate the situation for Russian forces in Robotine because the Russian forces in Klishchiivka and Robotine right now have a solid way of connecting. But if the Ukrainian forces flank Robotine, that connection will be broken, and that will seriously complicate the Russian position there, and it actually could lead to a salient collapse. We saw a very similar salient collapse near Rivnopil. Okay, if you go back to June 20, we saw this collapse near Rivnopil. If you go this is a picture of the situation on June 23rd near Rivnopil, okay? And then after that, if you notice, you're going to watch right here on the flanks near Novodorivka and near Makarivka, you're going to watch how the Ukrainians press their advantage and near Lovodny. And you're going to see how this entire salient collapses, okay? Watch. Watch this. Okay? Collapse. You know why? Because they were cut off far enough, and it just doesn't stop there. Continues. Okay? More collapse. More collapse. And the Russians regain some territory. So, the truth of the matter is, salients can collapse when a major town is flanked. That, the Russians want to avoid that at all costs. Because if that salient collapses in Robotine, the Ukrainians will literally be at the first line of Russian defense. And as we've seen recently, Russian forces have made a lot of counterattacks to regain lost territory, and while in some cases they've been successful, in others they have not. And if the Ukrainians take Robotine and fortify themselves there, that'd be bad news for the Russians, because they can essentially bring more and more equipment under heavy shelling. They can bring heavy equipment to Robotine and consistently launch direct attacks on the Russian first line defense. It seems like the Russians are being attrited in this offensive. In other words, the Ukrainians are sending wave after wave of attack, and many of the Ukrainian waves are getting mauled. But still, the sheer number of attacks and the sheer frequency of these attacks is taking a pretty significant toll on the Russian forces defending. And that can cause problems after weeks and weeks of offensive. You have to remember the Ukrainian offensive has been going on for almost 2 months. So after almost 2 months of this kind of fighting, you can easily see how this offensive will begin to wear on the Russian forces and their lines of defense. Now in this update, we're not going to be covering the Velika Novosilica front because I think there's a lot more important stuff to cover near Bakhmut. If we look near Bakhmut, the situation is getting worse and worse for the Russians. I said in my previous video that if the Ukrainians press their advantage in Bakhmut, they could potentially have a breakthrough there. Now, I said in my last video I didn't believe a breakthrough is imminent, and I still don't believe a Ukrainian breakthrough near Bakhmut is imminent, but it can happen if they wear the Russian positions here down. Near Klishchiivka, which is a very important town due to the fact that it is on the southern flank of Bakhmut. If Klishchiivka were to fall to the Ukrainians, Bakhmut would essentially be flanked. In this town, the situation has gotten worse and worse for the Russians. The Ukrainians and Russians were fighting tooth and nail over these heights surrounding Klishchiivka. Well, after a while, the Ukrainians took the heights, and it looks as if they have now moved in to the southern part of Klishchiivka right here, at least the outskirts. And this puts the Russian position in Klishchiivka in a tenuous situation. Because what the Ukrainians have done, not only have they directly attacked Klishchiivka, they've also attacked Andriivka right here. And I said this in my previous video, Andriivka is Klishchiivka's flank. So if the Ukrainians can't take Klishchiivka directly and flank Bakhmut, they'll take Andriivka, flank Klishchiivka, then take Klishchiivka and flank Bakhmut. They're really trying to get the city. The situation is getting worse for the Russians over here. I think the Ukrainians will press their attacks in Klishchiivka right there. I also think they will continue to launch attacks. I also think they will continue to launch attacks in Andriivka. As I said, if they take Andriivka, they've essentially flanked Klishchiivka. Up in Berkiivka, the northern flank of Bakhmut, the Russian forces seem to have held. The Ukrainians did make some advance near Homove right here, but in the actual city of Bakhmut, as in Bakhmut proper, the Russian forces have held their ground. In Berkiivka, the Russian forces have held as well. But I'm telling you guys, Klishchiivka, the Russians have to check this Ukrainian advance along this area. Because if they don't, the Ukrainians could break through Andriivka or Klishchiivka and flank Bakhmut from the south. That will cause severe issues, not just for the Russian forces in Bakhmut, but the Russian forces south of Andriivka right here, in the town of Zelopilya and Kurdyomivka. This is not a joke for the Russians. They have to do this because, as I showed previously, if the Ukrainians, hypothetically speaking, were to take Klishchiivka, they have like a 4-kilometer stretch till they press the next town. They could press straight down here, Odorivka, which is about 5 kilometers away, or they could push to Zayetsiv, or they could push straight into Opytne. If they push straight to Opytne, for example, Bakhmut is literally being flanked. You can easily see this could turn very great for the Russians and give the appearance of an encirclement, which could prompt the Russians to withdraw if Bakhmut appears encircled. So I think it's very important for the Russians to check that advance soon, or there could be severe issues. Up in the north, the Russian forces have continued their offensive near Kupiansk, and it appears as if the Ukrainians have launched counterattacks in these forest areas, but these counterattacks seem to have been repelled. As I said, for the Ukrainian forces, it's a very serious scenario. The Russian forces are literally about 9 kilometers from Kupiansk. That is a serious threat because Kupiansk is a railroad hub. That is railroads leading throughout a major section of Ukraine. And if the Russians capture this, it's very bad news. So the Ukrainians can't afford to lose that city. That's pretty much all the updates I have for you today. Be sure to subscribe to Coffee and Current Events so we're not missing out on any update I have coming out for you. On Coffee and Current Events, I have a mapping update coming for you every single day. So be sure to subscribe for that. That way you're staying informed on what's really going on in the Ukraine war and you're getting information that is unbiased from a YouTube channel that is focused on giving you the truth about what's really going on the front lines without the fluff of bias and fake news. God bless and stay tuned for more content.